Hello, Micah, and welcome to
Hi.
my YouTube channel. So I'm going to go ahead and start the interview by saying, Micah, how did the Jehovah's Witnesses come into your life?
Well, so my parents joined or became Jehovah's Witnesses in the late 70s. Um, I don't know how close to the whole 1975 debacle, but I was born in 1982 to Jehovah's Witnesses. I was a second generation. I was an only child. Um, Now, come to find out 25 years later, my I do have a half brother, but I don't know if my father knows about him or knew about him or not. Um, but my dad and mom both made the choice to kind of sever the ties with their family, and so really my family was my mom and dad in the congregation. And I knew that, we didn't see my dad's side or my mom's side because they weren't true Christians. And the few times that we would, I felt very uncomfortable because, I'm thinking, every night I'm praying for Jehovah to bring an end to his enemies. And I knew that meant killing everyone who wasn't a Jehovah's Witness. So, I would feel very uncomfortable drinking lemonade or whatever with them because it felt disingenuous. But that was my life. I feel like the life of a Jehovah's Witness is pretty much perpetual deja vu. When I'm 40, so when I was a kid, there were 3 meetings every week, and then the preparation, and we usually did 10 hours of service, and it was exhausting even as a in like first and second grade. Like I hope paradise comes so I can rest, because you just don't. And so when I was probably about 12, my father got sick, and they diagnosed him with a rare kidney disease and kidney cancer. So he did chemo for probably, I don't know, 6 months to a year. I really don't remember much. And I remember really fervently praying, like, because I was always hearing about, like, make supplication to Jehovah. And I prayed to him so much, and, said, please don't take my dad away. I need my dad. And he died when I was 13. And it's weird that my memory now, even now, pretty much just it begins. I remember very little before his death. I remember the day he died and his funeral, and then very little after for a long time. But I remember it when he was dying. The doctors recommended blood, and they said, this could give you more time, help you. And my dad said no, you know, and I remember at his funeral, one of his friends came up and hit me on the arm, or, like, not hit me, but told me to be proud of my dad for dying loyal. And I remember I wasn't proud. Well, I was proud that he stood up for what he believed in, but I was angry that God didn't save him. And, I'd heard all these fantastical tales about the Red Sea being parted, and all these people who are resurrected. And I needed my dad, and I hated God. I hated Jehovah for that, because to me it was a sin of omission. You could have saved my dad. You didn't. How dare you? I don't care about your sanctity. You're God. You can do whatever. It just seemed like a big waste of time. But of course, I internalized that and believed that it was evidence of, my sinful inclination, and that I wasn't really worthy of the truth. And that was certainly reinforced by my mother and everyone in the congregation. And so this was in 96, 97. He died in 96. But I,
At this point, I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you. At this point, had you been baptized?
oh, yeah, sorry. So I was baptized less than 4 months after my dad died, because it was, impressed upon me, you need to do this to make sure you see your dad again. And, in many ways, I just focused on seeing my dad again, turned off my mind, and just, did what I had to do. But I was very distraught, and I noticed people in the congregation begin withdrawing from me, excluding me, not talking to me because I'm in the true religion and I serve the happy God. So how dare I have depression and miss my dead father? And so I really thought that because I was sad about my dad, because my mother told me, once it was years later, why you need to get over your father. She told me her loss was greater than mine. And, they really criminalized my grief. And one of the things I've learned after is that cult members have to be walking, talking advertisements for the group because nobody joins these groups when their life is going good. It's not like, oh, I met this great woman, my job, everything's great. I'm going to join this crazy cult where I can't do anything. And so I began cutting myself, burning myself. Um, I remember one time I was just so unhappy. I was hitting myself in the head trying to black out with a bat, and I began trying, and I received no compassion from the congregation. And every time I went to a therapist, it always came where they would suggest or ask me if I ever thought about leaving. But how could I do that? How could I give up seeing my father again? And I tried to kill myself many, many times. Not passive attempts, not where I put it on the internet. I'm talking about, I don't know how I'm still alive. I really should be dead multiple times over. I even the week I turned 21, I overdosed on a bunch of sleeping pills, and I did die. My mother found me like twitching and screaming. I was in a coma for 37 hours, and they told me at the time they expected me to die of liver damage, but I never had anything happen really. I mean, I'm 40 now. Um, but from 13 to 33, it was just 20 years of abject misery, um, almost complete isolation. I remember one time I, I would go to the Kingdom Hall and say hi to people, and they would just turn and walk away. They wouldn't acknowledge me. I really began to wonder if I even existed sometimes. And one time I thought, I'm going to see how long I can go without receiving a phone call or a text. And I went a whole year with no communication from anyone, none of my friends or anything. I very much felt just like a non entity in the organization. And for me, numerous times, if I would watch an R movie or God forbid, the, look at a picture of a woman or whatever, I would go to the elders to bear my sin, and I really did try, but I was always getting in trouble for listening to heavy metal or I like to wear black. It's my favorite color, but of course, they interpreted that as me being evil. Just the dumbest things imaginable. And so I also wondered many times, since I was born into this, because they say Jehovah draws honest-hearted ones. Maybe I was born into it, but I'm evil and don't belong here. And of course, I couldn't have those discussions with my mother. She wouldn't hear them. She would just, walk away from me or whatever, say she was going to bed. And nobody in the congregation really would, speak to me either. And so when I was 33, I met a woman at my job, and she asked me about my religion. And so we ended up, I fell in love with her. And I invited her to the hall. Well, she asked about it, and I told her too, like, this isn't something I want you to do for me. This is a strict way of life. If you're not really about it, don't. And so she assured me that wasn't the case. But when she came to the congregation with her son, and the congregation really liked her, and even she said when she told some of them that I had witnessed to her, they were like, "Really, him?" And so she could see how they didn't like me. She even told me because at this point, sorry, I'm jumping around. I was disfellowshipped when I was 23 and reinstated after about a year. And I think 18 months. So she said she noticed people who had been disfellowshipped were treated as lesser in the congregation, which, I mean, I'm sure is true, but I didn't really think about it, because I always thought, oh, well, they messed up. Even if they are, that's deserved. So we were spending a lot of time together. I mean, not we were chaperoned, whatever. But they said that people in the congregation didn't like that we were spending time together, and I thought that was, well, it made me very angry because you didn't care when I was alone or when I tried to kill myself many, many times. I've suffered for 20 years at this point, and I didn't give a damn that they were offended. I mean, get a life. That you're offended what, that someone likes me? I couldn't reconcile that. And so I refused to I told him, this isn't scriptural. There's nothing you can show me as evidence of why I can't spend time with her. I said, because we said, if she gets baptized, I would date her, but before then we're just friends. It wasn't like a scheme. Uh, and at the time I thought, well, I was in the true religion, so maybe I could help fix something in the congregation, because I had heard stories growing up that sometimes elders were removed, but also you believe, an appointment as an elder is seen as evidence of God's blessing, so I ended up getting disfellowshipped a second time. Um, and up until then, there had been small periods where I hadn't lived with my mom, but she's a widow, so I always felt compelled to help her. So I was, yeah, I was disfellowshipped, and I didn't live with my mother anymore, so I was completely cut off, and when you're disfellowshipped, they tell you you're cut off from God's Spirit, Holy Spirit. He won't hear your prayers. So have no interaction with anyone really. I have my wife and my stepson, but I felt very alone, and I couldn't pray to Jehovah. I had really no support, and now we eloped, and so my ex-wife, for whatever reason, didn't tell her family we were married. They knew we lived together, but she continued not telling them for over a year, and it really broke my heart. I don't I don't know. I still don't understand it. But I began drinking very, very, very heavily, and not to get drunk, just to escape my reality. I just couldn't. I'm here. I rejected God for this woman, and she won't even tell her parents we're married. That just was probably the most painful thing I'd ever endured. So after, I think, about 2.5 years, I was reinstated, and it was, you have to write a reinstatement letter, and I was disfellowshipped in one congregation, and then began attending at the other one that met in that Kingdom Hall. And I just noticed all these differences among these elder meetings, things that they didn't care about or cared about in my first congregation, they didn't care about here. And I began to see that each Kingdom Hall is ran like a church. You hear about this worldwide unity, what they're doing in Rwanda and Germany, they're doing but I really was troubled by that, because why is this so inconsistent? And so finally I was reinstated. And my ex-wife got pregnant, and it was during COVID that I everything was falling apart. I was in a bad marriage. I had been drinking every day for pretty much 7 years, um, and I thought COVID was Armageddon. Um, I mean, that's what I was praying for. The end. That was seemed like every biblical prophecy being fulfilled. And I'm pretty sure I just had a complete nervous breakdown. Honestly, so I woke up in jail, and then after some time in jail, I was I got out, but I was homeless, and my car had been repossessed. I ended up being I was divorced and I lost absolutely everything I had. So at the time, I mean, I did drink too much. You know, I wasn't having DTs or like withdrawals or anything, but so I ended up getting into like a halfway house where to receive treatment. Well, I thought, and so when I was in these AA meetings, it was very familiar. The first one, everyone surrounded me, wanted to shake my hand, offered me cigarettes, you know, very much love bombing. And then I began to notice there was this mindless recitation. They're talking about prayer, and it all felt so familiar. But why did it feel familiar? You know, these people, I have tattoos, but they all had tattoos, you know, they're cursing, but it reminded me so much of being a Jehovah's Witness. And it really made me uneasy. And when I began to have questions, no one would answer them, and they would like demonize me. You know, I haven't drank in almost 3 years next month. You know, I've never touched alcohol again. I said I wouldn't, but they're all telling me like I can't trust my mind, which that reminded me of being a Jehovah's Witness. They're telling me, you know, are you trying to orchestrate some relapse, which is idiotic. If I wanted to drink, I would have done it the day I got out of jail. And so at that point, I really didn't know if had been in a cult or if Satan had taken me over and warped my mind, you know, with demonic influence. And when I remember I sat in someone's office in tears and I told them that, and they told me, you just want to feel special. You're a dry drunk, which that means you've quit drinking, but you're not dealing with any of the problems. They told me I suffered from terminal uniqueness, which is a shaming term created by Alcoholics Anonymous. And I was livid. I was really, really angry. And I was tired of being told things about me that I weren't true, that I knew weren't true, you know? And so at one point I Googled what are the tactics of a cult because I thought, well, how many of these will match up with being with Jehovah's Witnesses? You know, I thought maybe let's say there were 10 things. I thought maybe two or three. Every single one was just absolutely what was done to me from childhood. And it was just staggering to me. I was like, wow. And so it's really difficult to wake up when you have another organization trying to indoctrinate you. It really is difficult. And you know, people kept telling me about God, and I don't believe in God. I'm an atheist now. You know, they're telling me God loves me and has a plan and give it to God. No, I will not pray. I think it's a joke. It's stupid to me. I'm not going to do it. And I experienced people didn't really like me in that group, just like Jehovah's Witnesses, because I didn't believe in a higher power. So I uh, I went to therapy for about a year, and therapy has always been difficult for me because growing up as a Jehovah's Witness, it was weaponized against me. When I would say that I'm not happy being a Jehovah's Witness, therefore I should just die because I'm going to die at Armageddon anyway. My mom would frequently call the police on me, have me locked in stress centers for 72 hours. Um, just I had thousands of dollars in debt from all these, you know, ambulance rides and um but I did do therapy for a while and probably about a year. But I still didn't I don't know, it's such a long process waking up and I feel like every time you have a new memory or understanding, your brain goes back to the beginning and begins reprocessing everything, you know. And now my son, he's 5, and I my mother went out of her way to destroy my life too while I was in jail, you know, and afterwards to make sure I lost absolutely everything to estrange me from him. Over the past 3 years, you know, I see him as much as I can, but I've been, you know, re- paying off things, working on things, you know, it's just difficult. But so kind of for that reason, but for many reasons, I decided, well, I want to tell my story, because I was on the XJW Reddit once and I saw a teenager, I think they're 15, they said, my mother or my parents, I want to tell them I'm gay, but if I do, I know they'll throw me out and I'll be homeless. And I was homeless for 3 days as a 37-year-old man. I mean, I crawled under a bridge to see if I could live under there. And I knew that no one that I knew cared that it was winter, that I was cold, sad, and hungry. And it really, really offended me to think that a teenager had that fear in them over being gay, something they can't control, So I spent about a year. I began writing, and I did probably 10, 15 edits myself. And then I hired an editor and a lawyer, and I wrote a memoir, which is called Mentally Diseased, which is what they say about Jehovah's Witnesses that leave. And I found an ex Jehovah's Witness artist named Sarah Riches. I think that's how I say her last name, but she makes this amazing, beautiful art. I even have the original painting in my room. She sent it to me, and if I could have found an editor and a lawyer that were ex Jehovah's Witnesses, I would have, because I just wanted as many people involved in it that were raised like me as possible. And so I had hoped for catharsis in telling my story, but I published it last December 10th on my 40th birthday, my first birthday, as a way of celebrating it. But I didn't feel catharsis. I felt empowerment. And it was also that day on my Twitter and on my social media, I put my actual name. And uh, and now if you Google mentally diseased, my book comes up. I forever linked myself to one of Watchtower's shaming terms, and it, it's been really cool connecting with people who have read my story. And but mostly I wrote it for my son. I don't think he'll ever be a Jehovah's Witness. His mother isn't, but he does see my mother, and I know that she will try and indoctrinate him against my wishes no matter what. Um, and I'm working back to seeing him more, but it's just been it's hard when you're finding everything is just reduced to ash. But for me as a Jehovah's Witness, it was mostly just about being mistreated for being sad because my dad died, and I never really understood, and it really made me angry. So after I published my memoir, before each chapter, there's a poem because I make art and I've always written. Um, so I had a lot of people tell me they really liked the poetry within it. Well, I had about 100 poems that were unused. And so, since Watchtower says to avoid apostates' gangrenous speeches, that is what I titled my second book, which is poetry I wrote over 20 years. And it kind of, I think, one of my friends who's interviewed me twice, he told me he feels like it kind of complements my memoir. And it shows like the arrested development and just the mental, I mean, it's just 20 years of misery pretty much. But I felt like, I wanted to share that with the world because I know people are still suffering inside, that the witnesses, and it really is difficult. But and I'm also right now I'm writing a horror novella, which is kind of it's about the Antichrist, but it's an allegory for so many things, and I'm going to call that despicable. But for me, it's writing has really been beneficial for me. Connecting with people in the community has been great, and I've met some really cool people. But and each cover will have art by a different JW. The This one you can't see it the best, but uh, it's they go by, well, they're kind of anonymous on Twitter, but and then Stuart Fletcher, who he's a XJW artist. I believe he's Canadian. He's gonna do like a gothic horror painting for the cover of the third. And it's for me, it's really writing has opened so many doors because I work at a bar and most of the people are half my age. And when I told them, about my life and that I was writing a book, it, they like celebrated it. They have a thing, a barcode hanging up downstairs in my job, and it says Micah's book. And like most of them, I think bought it. I made stickers, gave them to people, they handed them out. Um, it's really been revelatory to be supported. Even though they met me and like my life was in shambles, and my divorce was finalized, and I had all this trauma and sadness, but they just accepted me. And I'm just an old crank. I don't know why people in their 20s want, like I'm gonna go see a movie tonight with a friend and her boyfriend. I mean, I'm friends with both of them, but they're like 24. Now, to me, I just didn't grow up with, no one cared. Even if I hurt myself, very few people even cared, even acknowledged it. They just ignored me. And so, uh, yeah, I think one of the worst things Jehovah's Witnesses do. I mean, there are so many, but they strip you of your individuality and your creativity and your passion. If you are an artist, you can go to Bethel and draw Jesus or whatever, but God forbid you try and be an artist or express yourself how you want. And I always hated that because I'm an individual or individualist, and I've always loved words. I've Since I was 18, I've wanted to write a book. And now I've written two and a third on the way. And it really has been crazy. Just like, I think writing has just been the most healing thing for me. And I've even, so in my second book, uh, when I was 18, I met a girl on the internet and we fell in love. And I wrote a bunch of emo love poems for her. And they're in there. And I reconnected with her. She lives in New Zealand. And we since I reconnected, we talk every single day. And I mean, she's my oldest friend. And it's been crazy because when I was talking to her, she told me she had memorized most of the things I'd written about her. And to just to live where, for me, I always felt I was in the Kingdom Hall on fire and no one cared. They had water, just absolutely, they had no interest in me. So then to know that, people have thought about me on and off over the years, or want to spend time with me, or even I had so much debt. I'm almost out of debt, but I promised myself I would just walk and all this stuff until I got a car. People give me rides or have concern for me, when it's cold, and just it, it's just crazy because you think the world is filled with such hatred, and then you realize you were living among probably the most hateful people on the planet. I mean, they tell you it's love, but it's hatred. They teach you hatred is love, and it's just it's sad because they don't know what they're perpetuating, many of them. I feel like at the elder level, when you have the handbook and all the stuff that is inconsistent, that's really the level where you have to know something's wrong. But the laity, they're so oppressed, and it's really frightening for me. How it's been with them saying newborn babies are the enemy of God. Trust us, do whatever we say. I do feel like Watchtower is losing members through their fingers, and I hope so. But I hope people don't, self-destruct when they leave. I mean, because for me, I just, I'm not even the person who wrote my memoir anymore. I feel like speaking out and kind of like reclaiming my power and identity almost that I've done with that. So it's yeah, I mean that's my story pretty much.
What a story. So how long have you technically, I know you said I thought the pandemic was Armageddon. When was the last time you stepped foot in the Kingdom Hall?
So we were doing Zoom meetings during the pandemic. Well, I confronted an elder who it was years before he had mocked me for being suicidal. And when I had reached out to him, he just belittled me and told me how easy my life was. So I called him during the pandemic, in the vein of be peaceable with your brother. And he told me that that had never happened. And there was another elder present. And now we spoke on the phone. I don't know if another elder was listening, but we ended up getting into an argument and I hung up on him. And then he called me back and I cussed him out. But they called me, two elders, and they told me that I needed to apologize to him. And I said, absolutely not. And so before, not too long before I woke up in jail, I was banned from the Kingdom Hall. They told me I could attend on Zoom and listen, but I was not allowed to physically come into the hall. And then when he had mocked me that summer, two men I grew up with they both shot themselves and died. And nobody cared. Nobody talked about it. Nobody said, are people struggling? Talk to a psychologist, maybe take some, no one cared. That's what happens when you leave Jehovah. And so I told him, I said, people like you make people kill themselves. I said, and I told him, I said, you're the worst people on the planet. I said, people like you don't even deserve to live, really. Like when you drive people to that, because one of them, his mother had died and it broke him and he had no support until, he shot himself. And then I heard about his little girl. I think she was 5 at the time. She asked the mom, "Will Daddy be in paradise?" And I really hurt to hear that because I thought that for so long as a 13-year-old. I can't imagine being 5 or 6 and wondering that. It yeah. And so when I told him that. Well, when I called my mother not long after that, he had told her that I threatened to murder everyone at the Kingdom Hall, and they had to call Bethel because I was such. And she said they'd never had anyone as disrespectful as me in the history of Jehovah's Witnesses. Which, okay, but Mom, you're gonna regret saying that because I'm publishing 3 books with their shaming terms and calling it the Apostasy Trilogy. Like if my mom thought I was a disappointment, then boy howdy. Um, so I haven't. It would be prior to September 2nd will be 3 years exactly when I've been away. So it was before that, probably August or something. I really don't know. I worked in a nursing home and it was so much craziness, But and afterward, when I was in jail, I reached out to my mother and asked for a Bible and for maybe the elders to talk to me. And now it was during the pandemic, so they didn't have physical court, but my mother filed a no contact order against me. And in virtual court, I heard her, uh, say that what a horrible person I was, really throw me under the bus and destroy my life as much as she could. And no, let me see. The first year I was invited to memorial, and I I told the elder, it was through text, but I said, "You didn't care I was homeless. Go away. Like you've got to be kidding me." Um, and then I think it was on November 19th of last year, I got a letter from my mom, and she told me, now my dad died of cancer. My mom had cancer. Her mom died of cancer when my mom was 5. Her twin brother died of cancer. There's a lot of cancer in the family. So she told me in the letter that I needed to get checked for a certain type of cancer. It was likely I could get it. And then she sent me an emotionless letter asking me to return to Jehovah. And I would wager I could write you a letter in 5 minutes and show more kindness to you. I still have it, but one part of it said, "I do love you. You are my son." and it looks like a robot or like AI wrote it. It just when I read it, I just was like, who wrote me this? What is this? It didn't even seem human. But I don't. My mother is she's a mindless drone of Watchtower, and I don't. Her and my dad. I was born into it, and I was indoctrinated, and isolated. But when you're in your 30s and you just hand over control of your life to an organization, I don't think you get it back. I mean, maybe, but it's very, very rare. And so I really haven't had any interaction. Where I live, there is a Jehovah's Witness who he tried to convert me once, not knowing, and it was so weird because it was like I knew what he was gonna say before he said it, and then when I told him about my experiences and how I felt about the governing body and all this, he just told me, well, what you experienced, those weren't true witnesses, and true witnesses, blah blah blah. And he's been a Jehovah's Witness for 8 years. I spent 37 years. I like to think I know a little bit more about it than you, but I mean, it's really sad, but it's not. I'm not in the life saving business anymore. If you want to be a Jehovah's Witness, I really don't care. It doesn't. I think it's a bad idea, but you do you. Um, I don't know. The XJW community has really been. I mean, yeah, you're gonna have toxicity and infighting, in any group, but I've really met some amazing people, and some people I talk to, almost every day, if not every day, and but yeah, it's been a it's been a trip.
I can attest to that. Thank you so much for sharing your story. And I'm going
Yeah.
to leave all the details of where people can purchase your books in the description. Is there anything that you feel like you left out that you'd love to add in this interview?
I would just like to say, I really think it's important once you leave to sit with yourself and question every single thing about yourself because, for me, I was very much a contrived person, and I've always had a lot of anger and I always thought it was because of my sin. But now I think I see it very clearly as just I was trying to fit into this group and I didn't. And not that I didn't have an identity, but like so many things, it's like, I mean, even your sexuality. Are you straight or were you straight because you were told you had to be? Do you believe in equality? Are you sexist? Are you racist? All of those things you really can't develop because you have to be this certain way. And I just think it's really important to sit and ask yourself really hard, unpleasant questions. And for me personally, creativity has been a huge outlet, and just I hope people don't give up. I mean, I certainly understand that desire, and it can be really overwhelming. But one of my friends once told me, he said, Watchtower wants you to die because when you die, they can say, look at him. That's what happens when you leave Jehovah. They don't know, none of them will care really. You just reinforce their persecution narrative. So, if anything, stay alive out of spite.
I love the advice that you gave. Such important information to actually ask yourself questions so you know that you believe it and that these beliefs weren't handed over to you by an organization, your community, another religion, your culture, society. Really looking within and, like you said, asking yourself some really uncomfortable questions is so important to do that and not just even staying with the same beliefs you've had years ago, even if you have been an ex-witness, because like you said before, you're always changing. You said you're not the person that you were when you wrote your first book. So just constantly checking in with yourself along the way and along the years of your progression is so important just to look inward and just constantly being curious about who you are in the present moment. So again, I want to say thank you so much for sharing your story. I so appreciate it. And with that, I'm just going to say thank you so much for tuning in for another